The next step in the grant proposal writing process and developing your grant is to work on the evaluation section. The evaluation section is where you have the opportunity to show the funder how you're going to measure the impact of the project or program that you're asking money for, and ultimately the impact that the funding or dollars that the funder gave you has had on the community. So it is a process that determines the impact, effectiveness, and efficiency of a program. And along with that, it will look at lessons learned. So what worked and what didn't work. So it's important that you include the evaluation strategy within the plan, and then you can report back to that when you have to provide the pre-report to the funder. It does need to be determined prior to implementation, and lengthier proposals in particular will sometimes even ask you to include the specific tools. So you'll have to design the evaluation tools, surveys, for example, questionnaires, um, and include those as appendices, for example, or even part of the proposal to show exactly what you're going to be evaluating. Um, but it again, it really is the section that's going to strengthen the proposal. I've worked on a really large grant in the past, and we refunded it because of our evaluation section. We included a logic model where other programs hadn't done that, and so it put us in front, because a logic model can be very visually tangible to a funder. It puts everything on one page and shows what they're putting in, the inputs, the activities, and ultimately the impact and outcome, all on one page. So if you had me a needs assessment, you worked on a logic model in that class. I am going to just briefly show you one here with some questions. It's a more of a piece of a logic model. But ultimately, the evaluation section is going to also fulfill that obligation to verify and document the impact on the community. Then again, ultimately, the impact of the funders' dollars on the community. And so this is a sort of piece of a logic model. Generally, there's a lot more to them. There's more information, but this just gives you a sense of some of the questions and key evaluation questions that you would ask in each stage of the logic model. So when you're developing your worksheets, you'll use the workbook and the example, but also be thinking of type of evaluation questions that are going to occur throughout the entire program or project that you're implementing. So kind of thinking back to those methods and subtasks, and that you're asking evaluation questions throughout the process and implementation. So from over here, this would be the input section, and that's what's going into the project. So the funding, the money, staff, employees, partners, research, for example, would be in here. And so was there enough of them to fulfill the project? Were they timely? Those are type of questions you may ask here. And then you have sort of the activities of the activities and outputs that would be part of the logic model. And questions you might see here would be, so they were looking to design some parent education curriculum and implement 6 training sessions. So was it produced? Was that curriculum developed? And were the sessions delivered? And were they delivered effectively? And then when we look at the outputs and the actual the target population that attended, did they attend? Who did or who didn't, and did they ultimately attend all sessions? So thinking about attendance and process evaluation type questions. Then on the impact and outcome type questions, you will look at changes in knowledge, attitudes, skills, maybe even policy changes would be in this area, in availability of resources, but ultimately then we want to see if there was a change in the ultimate goal that you were set out to achieve. So here the goal, move myself there, was to reduce rates of child abuse and neglect among participants. So has there actually been a decrease in rates among participants, and were the goals met? Because ultimately you want to have your questions link back to the goals and objectives that you've created for your program. So I just wanted to show this here as something that in the future you may have the opportunity to actually include and incorporate a full logic model, which then I would advise you to go online and get a larger template of a logic model. This was just a half size to show you the evaluation questions that you would ask to go along with it. So quickly, I will then just go over the worksheet that you have for this week. So this, I think, is pretty explanatory, or I mean, the example is really good for you this week. And so just definitely apply what is there. This is the template, and then I'll pull up the example. So what questions will your organization's evaluate activities seek to answer? So the objectives of the program, are they being met? This is fine, but you could also be more specific. And the next one is the program meeting seniors' needs in a cost-effective way. So go back to maybe some of those questions I mentioned in previously a few minutes ago, and think about those as different questions. Again, this is just to give you an idea. I think the more information you put on these worksheets, the better, and the more feedback you'll get from me. And then what kind of data will be collected? So number of people leaving Meals on Wheels program, where they went, number of referrals, and level of increase in satisfaction. So kinds of data, this is where you also want to look back to the objectives that you wrote, and the kinds of data should definitely link back to that. So I showed you an example of a table that was in a grant. It's in the example, I believe, on Moodle for the grant proposal example, of a table where they had their methods and the people responsible, and also how it was evaluated, the indicators on there, the kinds of data, and maybe even at what points, all on that same table. So a different way to display it, in another good way, which I will show you that again later in the semester when you start getting ready to put your final proposal together. And then when are you going to collect that, at what points? So you have example here of daily and quarterly. Don't forget to also collect data at the start possibly, or at the end, to see if there's been a change overall. So that may be some additional points you add. And then what will you be using? So questionnaires or surveys could be added in here. You have a tracking system, interviews, and then comparison, if you have a comparison, if any. So you might not have one here for that. If you intend to study a sample of participants, so most of the time you won't, unless you're doing a research grant, then you're going to have a sample possibly. Or if you have a really large program that's going to reach a lot of people, you might have a short study to see how the program or project is being received. So that was where you would put that in there. And then the procedures that you will use. So in this example, they do a quarterly review to determine it. Some may warrant more that, if you're trying to get this done over a year, quarterly is good. But, if at the start, you may need to do some things monthly to make sure things are on track to get implemented during the time frame of that grant project, right? And then conducting the evaluation, program director, you can, if you're the program coordinator, that could be put in there. These are all great people to include for receiving the reports. If you think of anyone else that is particularly applicable to your project, include those. And then this is a key part right here, and how you're going to define the success of this program or project. If you remember from the first slide from the short video, that the evaluation piece is really to show how you as an organization are going to define success. And they want to see that definition align with their funding goals and objectives and their mission. So again, always making sure it links back to the organization mission that you have as well, the objectives and the goals that you've created, and how you will define that. So here, when the new social services program, they'll consider it when they've met all the objectives. And then in the longer term, a noticeable decrease in the number of frail elders leaving their homes for institutions. So going back to that ultimate goal that they had. So this is the next step. Remember to definitely be referring to your worksheets 4 and 5 for this, which are the goals and objectives and the methods, because that is what you're going to ultimately kind of be evaluating. And then from there, the next steps will be looking at budgets and sustainability. But this is sort of the third piece of the full program kind of planning, implementing, evaluation piece that you're going to describe in your grant proposal. As always, please let me know if you have questions, and I look forward to reviewing your worksheets.